Hello, everyone, and welcome. Now, I'm so glad that you could join us today on this weekly walk. Today, we've got some very fascinating historical gems to uncover as we're about to explore Equine Central Park. So, basically, that means that we're going to walk along the Bridal Trail along the southwestern edges of the park, and then find out how folks from the past used horses in Manhattan's largest and most celebrated green space. And then we'll end off with a discussion on how these large animals have been portrayed in the park in the form of art and architecture, such as grand statues and monuments. But of course, before we begin, let's go ahead and go over the Zoom controls real quick. Now, feel free to use the chat feature on your Zoom control bar, and you can, of course, say hello and comment. You can also use the Q&A feature to ask any questions. Now, joining us on the back end today is going to be our new park guide, Carla, as well as Desiree. And they're both going to go ahead and answer any inquiries that you folks might have. You're also going to see the closed captioning button enabled. You can turn them off by simply pressing the live transcript button. And of course, today we're also going to be using quite a few historic images from a variety of different sources today. And these are going to be taken from the New York Public Library, the New York Historic Society, the Museum of the City of New York, Library of Congress, and of course, the archives of the Central Park Conservancy. Now, as you all know, our official mission here at the Central Park Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate the park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life. And of course, we've been hard at work taking care of the park since 1980. All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started. So in the mid-19th century in New York City, as you've all probably seen in countless historic photos, horses were simply a part of everyday life, and these streets were often packed with carriages transporting people and goods, riders on horseback, and of course, everything else in between. Here in Central Park, horses have been used in various different ways since the very beginning. Now, back in the 1800s, they were used primarily by visitors sightseeing by horse carriage, or perhaps by more adventurous folks looking to explore the rocky trails of Central Park on horseback. And of course, you also would have seen quite a few of these horses being used for security purposes. Since the early 1900s and the advent of the automobile, horses became much more rare to see in the city streets. But you'll still see them in use today, as in the case of Parks Enforcement Patrol, which uses a mounted unit to, of course, control or rather to patrol Central Park. Now, you're also going to see a lot of public art featuring horses in Central Park today, and these were going to be added throughout the park at some point by the early to mid 20th century. And of course, we'll discuss these on the walk for today. But let me go ahead and first turn on the live transcript first. And there we go. Now you should be able to see the live transcript right now. All right, folks, let's go ahead and take a look at the map first. So let's go ahead and, yep, there we go. All right, so on this walk, of course, we are going to make our way through the western and southern edges of the park, pretty much following the Bridal Trail until it terminates over at Pine Bank Arch. At which point, we're going to head over towards the Carousel and then finally make our way south to examine the equine statues and monuments of 59th Street. And of course, along the way, we're going to examine some of the famous landmarks of this area, like its many bridges, architectural features, and even some of the statues and memorials here. All right, so let's begin over at Central Park West and 72nd Street, over by what's called Women's Gate. Now, the spot gets quite a lot of visitors since we're just right off of Strawberry Fields, one of the most popular areas for folks since it's so easily accessible by the subway station just right across the street. Here, you're going to inevitably encounter tourists from all over the planet, and because of that, you'll often see lots of pedicabs waiting for them right here in this very spot. All right, so from here, we're going to make our way under the shade of the wisteria plants on this rustic wooden pergola, and then make our way north towards the access path connecting towards the Bridal Trail. So we actually catch the trail here, just a few steps to the north from the 72nd Street entrance. We're going to make a left turn at this intersection. Now, if we look down at the ground, we can see some of the large rocks and dirt that make up the gravel path of the bridle trail. These days, it's heavily used primarily by our runners who prefer the more natural materials over concrete for a more comfortable jog through the park. But of course, the bridle trail was created for the sole purpose of folks on horseback. It was created as a part of the original Greensward plan, which was the blueprint for the park's design back in the late 1850s. Now, by separating horseback riders from horse carriages and pedestrians through the use of separate drives and roadways, that actually allowed for a much smoother flow in park traffic. And with so many people taking the journey up to see the brand new Central Park in the mid 1800s, that I think made for a much better experience for everyone involved. Now, initially, the bridle trail only went around the large body of water that would become the Jackie Kennedy Onassis Reservoir. The trail in that part of the park provided some really nice views of the water, and of course, it was quite a hot spot for New Yorkers with access to their own horses. However, some horsing enthusiasts thought that actually was not enough. So they actually lobbied the city to expand the bridle trail towards the west side of the park, extending all the way south towards Grand Army Plaza. So if you folks take a look here at the map, the blue line here represents where the bridle trail runs today. Now, as you can see, it pretty much terminates in the middle of the park, right near where Heckscher Playground is, but originally it ran all the way towards the southwest corner of the park, over by Grand Army Plaza. It was basically rerouted in the 1930s, so right around the same time period when the automobile started replacing horses as the primary mode of transportation here in the United States. So let's go ahead and continue further up the trail and see where this pathway takes us. First, we're going to make our way through this archway carrying some of the park traffic above us. This is, of course, called Riftstone Arch, and it's one of the widest arches and bridges in the park at roughly 80 feet. Of course, since we are on the bridle trail, I like to think that folks passing underneath this arch on horseback would have used this as a very important landmark of some sort on their journey through the park. Now, you might have actually seen Riftstone Arch before in art. The most famous depiction of it was actually painted back in 1939 by Edward Hopper, who was the same artist that created the very iconic Nighthawks painting. This, of course, is a very dramatic depiction of the bridle trail, but you can really get a sense of just how fast and exciting horseback riding really was in the early years and decades of Central Park. By the way, the structure that you folks are looking at in the background, just beyond the arch, that's actually supposed to be the Dakota Building, which is just right off the park entrance over at 72nd Street. All right, folks, let's go ahead and move right on down the trail and make our way towards the next stop. And from here, the bridle trail follows the main drive for a little bit as we walk south. Now, on our right-hand side, you might be able to catch a glimpse of the Tavern on the Green. And of course, directly ahead of us, you can see the grand skyscrapers of Midtown Manhattan. Right ahead, as we keep following the trail, we now come to Dale Head Arch. Now, the Sandstone Archway was once the approximate location of a former creek that once ran right through the hills and dales of the west side of Manhattan. It was called Devore's Mill Stream, and it was once, at some point, this very important waterway running through the island. The city landscape has, of course, changed quite a bit since then, and today you're more likely to find joggers, tourists, dog walkers, and other pedestrians walking under this archway. Now, here's Dale Head Arch back when it first opened in the 1860s. Again, the landscape around it has seen quite a lot of changes, especially with the growth of all the trees and the addition of all the new plantings. Note the riders on horseback just in front of the archway. As we've seen, traveling by horse was one of the most popular activities to do in the early Central Park, and these bridges and arches had the very important job of separating one type of traffic from another. In this case, riders would be kept separate from slower moving pedestrians and carriages who would have had to use the roadway directly above. Nearby, just a few steps down from Dale Head Arch, we come to one more bridge on our walk for today, but it's the last one, I promise, folks. This one is called Pine Bank Arch, and it was named for the many pine tree plantings right around the corner from the archway, primarily eastern white pines. We've actually seen this one before a few weeks ago in a previously weekly walk with myself, so we won't spend too much time here. However, you'll notice that just beyond the archway, the Bridal Trail all of a sudden comes to this very abrupt stop. If it seems a little awkward and out of place, that's because the trail wasn't actually supposed to terminate here in the first place. The Bridal Trail, if we actually take a look again at this old map from the early 1870s, originally ran all the way to Grand Army Plaza. You can see here on the map that the blue line, that basically kind of wraps around the reservoir and of course makes its way right down the west side. Now, by the 1930s, because of public demand to create more playground facilities for children, the city actually expanded nearby Heckscher Playground, and then they paved over the old Bridal Trail, which of course you can see here on the map as the dotted line, and effectively cutting off equestrians from making their way down to the main park entrance at Grand Army Plaza at 59th Street. Again, taking a look at the map here. You can see that it pretty much ran right through this very, very busy section of the park. So imagine seeing all these horses today in the 21st century making their way over to 59th Street. All right, folks, let's go ahead and continue on. And believe it or not, these days you can indeed actually still bring your horse into Central Park and go for a ride on the Bridal Trail, just as how it was first intended. Every once in a while, you're going to see people out in the trail with their horses. It is more and more rare to see these days, but they're able to use it just as much as any other horseback rider did back in the mid-1800s. However, trying to transport your horses through the very busy streets of Manhattan, well, that's a completely different story. One reason why the Bridal Trail doesn't get as much use from equestrians any longer is that the last remaining horse stables, at least near the park, actually left back in 2007. Prior to this, you could actually rent out a horse from the Claremont Riding Academy, formerly located along West 92nd Street, and enjoy a full day of riding around Central Park. In fact, there actually used to be quite a lot of these riding academies that were located just outside of the park walls. So here in this newspaper newspaper from 1893, for instance, you can see some of these very, very popular stables that advertise their services just outside of the park. So they included companies like Derlin's Riding Academy, Dickel's Riding Academy, and all the way down here at the bottom, you can see the Central Park Riding Academy, which is located just right off of 7th Avenue. For a very small fee, these stables would actually teach you how to properly ride a horse right along the Bridal Trail. Now, here we have an image of a riding master from one of the horse stables along 59th Street. Of course, right off in the background, you might be able to see the sandstone walls of the park entrance, especially right here on the right-hand side, and over towards the left, just behind the horse. You can actually see what appears to be a small kiosk, similar to the ones that you'll see today along the park entrances on 59th Street. And of course, horse carriages were quite popular as well. Now, back in the days before automobiles, New Yorkers would flock to Central Park, sometimes in private carriages where they'd go and explore from the comfort of their own vehicles with their own drivers. These days, the horse carriages can still be found taking visitors around the park. And of course, in addition to all these riders on private horses, as well as the many horse carriages that can be found on the park perimeter, you also see the park's enforcement patrol keeping the park safe on horseback. Now, this is actually a holdover from the 19th century when security personnel would actually patrol around on their horses. It eventually became another one of the many iconic traditions to see in the park. These mounted police officers that could be seen riding around, keeping the park safe. All right, folks, I think right now it is a good time to, of course, conduct our poll of the day. So let me go ahead and share that with you all right now. And of course, since we are on the topic of horses, today I wanted to ask you folks, have you ever participated in any horseback riding activities in Central Park before? Now, I know that a lot of us aren't really equestrians, myself included. In fact, good luck trying to get me to ride a horse at all, period. But you know what? That's okay if you've never tried it out. Some of you might have actually participated in this long-time tradition in the past, or you might be one of the few that actually still actively uses it today, if you have access to your own horse. All right, folks, looks like most of you have all voted. So let's go ahead and end off the poll and share the results. And of course, it looks like a good majority of us, about 96% of us have not actually utilized the Bridal Trail, which actually makes a lot of sense. Again, horseback riding is not the most popular activity to do any longer in Central Park. But for those of you who have done so, you are, of course, pretty much in the minority at roughly 4%. And 1% of you actually frequently rides the horse, which is really, really amazing. Quite fantastic that that actually is still around. All right, folks, let's go ahead and end off our poll, and then we'll go ahead and continue on with our walk. So far, we've walked a good chunk of the Bridal Trail so far, and we've also taken a look at some of the ways that horses have been used here in the past in the park, primarily for recreational purposes. From here, I wanted to focus on how horses have been depicted in the park's artwork and architecture. So our next stop right now is going to be the Carousel, just a few steps away from Pine Bank Arch. Now, in order to get there, we're going to need to meander through the many pathways of Heckscher Playground and the ball fields, which again were created back in the 1930s at the expense of the Bridal Trail. And after a bit of walking, we come to this octagon-shaped brick building housing the Carousel. Now, this is actually put up back in 1951. And just like a lot of different structures that was created here in the park during the 20th century, it's really quite distinctive for its use of yellow and red bricks. And taking a look inside, we can see what the current Carousel looks like today. Even though it was actually installed in early 1951, it had actually been around for several decades, since at least 1908. This particular Carousel was designed by the artists Saul Stein and Harry Goldstein for something called the Artistic Carousel Manufacturing Company of Williamsburg in Brooklyn. It's one of the largest merry-go-rounds in the world when it first was created. In fact, it has something about 58 of these very, very colorful and very beautifully crafted and painted horses, plus 2 chariots and a mechanical organ. Originally, this carousel was installed in Coney Island, but by 1951, it was then sent here to Central Park to replace an older carousel that had actually burnt down. Apparently, the previous carousels, at least the ones from the 19th century, they were actually pulled by actual real horses and mules that were located below ground in the basement. Today, thankfully, it's actually powered by electricity, so a little bit more modern these days. All right, and just outside approaching the building, we can see this wrought iron fence that features, what else? Little tiny depictions of the wooden horses of the carousel itself. And right underneath, you can see this lullaby etched onto the wrought iron. This is basically a lullaby called All the Pretty Little Horses. And of course, since we are in the children's district with all the families and little kids passing through, I think its location is quite perfect. The version of all the pretty little horses that we're looking at right here was actually transcribed by Alan Lomax, who is a folklorist in the early 20th century. All right, folks, so for our last few stops, I thought we could go ahead and check out the many horse statues along Central Park South. So let's go ahead and make our way over there right now. Now, realistically, it's actually kind of a bit of a walk to make our way down from the Carousel over to 59th Street. So let's go ahead and speed things up a bit using the magic of the power of the internet. And of course, right up ahead, beyond the rocky outcrops, we're going to take these steps up towards the street level. All right, so we've now made it back outside of the park walls. Now, these days, this area is usually packed to the brim with tourists and the many horse carriages catering to them. Even though a lot of folks think that the horse carriages are actually operated by the Central Park Conservancy, they're actually operated by private companies, and they're actually overseen by the city via the Department of Consumer Affairs. So with that in mind, right now we are at the corner of 59th Street, looking down 6th Avenue, which you can see over on the right-hand side, officially designated by the city as the Avenue of the Americas. And I know that most locals don't actually really call it Avenue of the Americas, but it did get its name back in 1945 when the city had grand ambitions to attract consulates from all around Latin America to this particular corner of New York City. So appropriately enough, several of these very grand and very prominent equestrian statues depicting Latin American war heroes and revolutionaries were put up here around that same time period. So right in front of us, we can see Jose de San Martin, who helped liberate Argentina, Chile, and Peru from the Spanish Empire in the early 1800s. Now, this is actually gifted to the city of New York by the people of Buenos Aires in exchange for a statue of George Washington. And just a few steps to the east, we can see Jose Marti of Cuba, depicted here during the exact moment of his death in 1895 after receiving a bullet while leading troops to battle against Spain. Now, it's actually one of the last great masterpieces by the artist Anna Hyatt Huntington, who created the statue at the age of 82. Now, the statue was completed back in 1959, but because of the political situation with Cuba at that point, its unveiling was actually postponed a few years later to 1965 when tensions cooled off just a little tiny bit. And of course, rounding out the trio of equestrian statues of Latin American war heroes and revolutionaries, we come to Simone Bolivar. This is the oldest of the three statues here. Now, this was created back in 1921 by Sally James Farnham. And initially, it was unveiled over at West 83rd Street on top of Summit Rock. It was moved here to its current location back in 1951. But for many years, that Summit Rock, was actually known as Bolivar Hill. These days, of course, since the statue is no longer there, most folks don't really remember or don't really call it by its older name any longer. All right, everyone, we are now on our last leg of the walk. So we're going to make our way east from 6th Avenue and finish things off over at Grand Army Plaza. Of course, it's just a short walk away, so let's head over there right now. But in order to do so, we're going to need to follow the southern perimeter walls until we get to this intersection near 5th Avenue. And after crossing the street, we've now finally arrived here at the Plaza, which is going to be topped off with one of the grandest statues in all of New York City. This is going to be the Sherman Monument. It's one of the last great works by Augustus St. Gaudens, who was generally known as one of the finest sculptors in America at the turn of the 20th century. Now, this gold-plated statue, of course, depicts the Civil War General William Tecumseh Sherman on his trusty steed, Traveler, as he's led by a figure representing the goddess of victory, Nike. Now, one great thing about the statue is its prime and very busy location at the confluence of Central Park, the Upper West Side, and Midtown. And because of this, it actually welcomes a ton of visitors and even has some pretty swanky neighbors with the world-famous Plaza Hotel just right across the street. All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and end things off here, appropriately enough, at the former entrance of the Bridal Trail, where we're greeted by one of the finest equestrian statues in America. Now, I hope you've all learned just a bit more about the history of horses in Central Park and how they were used for work, as well as their artistic importance. All right, folks, so that does it for us today. So don't forget to check out our Statues and Monuments tour this month, where we get to explore more of the great works of public art that you can find in Central Park. Of course, you can sign up online. My colleagues are going to go ahead and leave the link in the chat box below. And of course, don't forget to follow us on all of our social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. You can use the hashtag #TheParkNeedsUs, and we might just feature your comments. I'm going to go ahead and leave the room open for any last final questions. But otherwise, from all of us here at the Central Park Conservancy, stay safe and be well. Have a good day, folks.